TJ.
Happy Friday, everybody, and welcome to the next installment in our Stay Engaged series. We started doing these sessions after the COVIDs struck the world, and we're just trying to bring value to startups, entrepreneurs, those thinking about business in a meaningful way during this time, using the tools that we've all come to know and love, namely Zoom. You can see the playful background here. We're not actually playing bingo, it's just a little Friday humor, but thanks for coming. I see a lot of familiar faces and some unfamiliar faces, which is awesome. If you ever want to reach out to me, learn more about ABQID, CNM Ingenuity, and the programs that we run, you can always reach me. And Dan has contact information. And thanks to all the ActivateNM companies, Activate New Mexico companies here represented. Activate New Mexico is a pretty killer program for startups. It's a cohort-based program to build your startup faster, better, stronger than you can possibly do on your own, where we bring in great mentors, a great program founded in the lean startup methodology. And today, we have one of the mentors for that program, Rick Shor, with us, and I'm going to hand it off to him momentarily, but just want to sing a few praises. Rick has been very involved since the beginning of Activate New Mexico and involved in helping get startups the resources that they need here in Albuquerque since he came to our beautiful state a few years back from various places, but I think most recently Seattle. And he can tell a little bit more about his story, but Rick's a powerful generalist when it comes to business ideation. And he's got a lot of wisdom and experience to share. And specifically on this topic of risk, I do think it's timely because the answer to this question on your screen is yes. Right now, your startup is a very risky business, but those who use good frameworks and good thinking, especially in times like this where the situation is evolving daily, if not weekly, in terms of markets, can move quicker and rise up. So that's, of course, what we want here in New Mexico. So thanks again for joining us, and I'm going to turn it over to Rick. Thanks for giving this session today.
You're welcome. Welcome, everyone. Just explain a little bit of the background and why I wanted to do this topic. And it's because as a consultant, I've dealt with this for many, many, many years. And my experience has been that when you start to talk about risk analysis and risk management, people tune out. In some cases, they don't merely tune out. I've even been told by some people that entrepreneurs don't need to deal with risks. That's the old way of doing things, as opposed to, our agile approach, quick pivots, all those things. But I think you'll see by the end of the presentation why it is important. And what I'll try to do here in order to diffuse some of the technical language that's used in risk management is to just put it into plainer language. So let's get started here. So first of all, we want to discuss what is a risk. And we're going to give you an exercise. So I'd like you to type into the chat box 3 or 4 words that you associate with risk. And then Dan is going to put up a little poll with the question, are risks good, bad, or something else? And we'll come back and talk a little bit about those answers. So let's take a few minutes to do that. 3 or 4 words that you associate with risk. I'm not seeing the chat box, Dan. What am I doing wrong here?
You might need to hover below your shared screen.
And below the shared screen.
So
stop sharing.
Or if worst comes to worst, you can stop sharing your screen and then you'll see the chat box button.
Okay. Yeah. Well, let me stop sharing for now. There we go. So we have cost, time, fear, regulation, legal, financial, lost time, failure, reward, chance, unknown, agreement, random, uncertainty, opportunity, need for more information, angst, loss, reward. Oh, pretty heavy answers, everybody. Okay, well, let's go to the poll. Dan? Okay, is everyone answered?
We're still waiting on a couple of people. Just to reiterate, we did launch a poll and you are putting your feelings about what risks are. Are they good, bad, or something else? Okay, ending poll. Here are the results.
Interesting. And it's interesting that no one said that risks are bad, which is actually pretty advanced because risks just are. There's no way we can completely eliminate risks. They're there. And we have to do our best to understand them and to manage them so that we don't experience any of the effects that you've typed into the chat box here, like lost time, failure, uncertainty is a key word with risk, cost, lost time. So we'll move on here. I'm going to share my screen again, presentation. What do you all think? If the risks are something else, what are they to you?
You want dialogue here, or you want everybody using the chat room here, Rick?
We can have dialogue.
All right. If you could allow everybody to unmute, Dan.
Yep. Everyone has been allowed to unmute. Just if you could raise your hand or signal somehow so they can call upon you.
I'll use the grid to do that. Let's go to
Chap and Harold, I think.
Go ahead, Chap.
Gambling, stress, excitement, change.
Okay. Harold, did you want to add something?
Sure. For me, it's the idea that without risk, I mean, you know, it's very difficult to think of a reward without risk. I think of risk as a very positive thing. I mean, of course, you know what I did for a whole segment of my career. So risk was all about risk. But I believe you don't make much progress without taking risks. And I think that there are ridiculous risks and then there are positive risks. And I like the idea of positive risks.
Anyone else? All right, good. Well, let's move on to our next exercise. Again, we're going to do breakout groups, which Dan is arranging. I want you now to think of a definition of risk. And you can make something up. You can Google something and bring it back, or if you have other sources, that's fine. And in your groups, want you to see whether you can zero in on what you think is the best definition and why. And during this discussion, do your best to exercise your active listening skills so that you're sure you understand the others in the group. Then when we call you back, we'll ask you to share your decision about the definition and to justify the approach or the, okay? Anyone have any questions about that? All right, and we'll take 5 minutes for this. So it's about 11:15. We'll have you back here at 11:20, ready to present your answers, and you can choose one person from the group to do that.
Okay, breakout rooms are ready. There will be a button that says join breakout room. If you have any questions or need help from Rick, just click the ask for help and I will add him to that room. There are 3 individuals in each room, including TJ. You are in room 2 as well. Okay, here we go.
There we go. Cool.
Okay, everyone's in their breakout room successfully, just you and I in the main.
Okay. So we'll give them a warning at about, 11:20.
Okay, so at 11:20, you want a 1-minute countdown or?
Give them a 1-minute countdown at 11:20.
Okay.
I'm surprised that I can't. How did that go? Good.
Oh, it feels like a time warp coming back from the breakout rooms. Like I'm
hyperspeed.
Okay, who'd like to go first?
We'll go first, just since we're group 1.
Sierra?
When I first came on, I just said
Oh, Adam.
the classic phrase of risk reward is what comes to mind, but we kind of flipped it, that we're focusing on the reward, and you can't have rewards unless there's a little bit of risk associated to it. So it's understanding that if you want to have reward, understanding you have to put in place a bunch of items and processes to mitigate the risk as much as possible, but they're part of the roadmap to the reward that you're seeking.
Okay, great. Next.
We were with Harold and Demetria in group 2. And our definition we kind of put together was the process of identifying options, weighing each and calculating and deciding on a choice of action to make.
Okay. And the third group? Is there a third group?
Sure.
We have,
yeah.
I unmuted. We have a perceived or inherent sense of danger or uncertainty. Would you like me to elaborate?
Okay, that's great. I think that last one might actually be the best definition of risk. Can you sort of nail what we call risk management? We'll talk about that a little bit more. It's a broader space. And Adam, also, we talked about understanding the processes to understand what the trade-offs are. Also, all applicable. So let's continue with the presentation here. And I want to talk just a minute about the picture that Dan, and I'm not picking on Dan, just using this as an example. This was a picture that he pasted into the invitation. And so a lot of people see this dichotomy that you have risk or you have safety. And that there's a trade-off between those, and the reward doesn't factor into this. Oh, and by the way, I just wanted to say at the beginning, I talked about the fact that startups sometimes don't think this is important. If you notice on your canvas, you don't have a place to catalog risks, which I think is interesting, but you'll need to do it somewhere else. So risk and safety, they're not the only kind of trade-off. There's risk versus reward, as Harold explained. And some of you might not know that Harold was a trader in Chicago for 35 years, was it, or something like that? And he was very good at it because he was probably taller than everybody else in the pit there. Could see over everyone else's heads. But anyway, if we get to risk versus reward, and we talk about the risk of loss and potential reward, you can sort of place different things in different spaces. So if we take the gold rush in 1849, for instance, there was some potential for reward. It was usually the first people who got there. And the risk of loss was huge. But you know, it was such a massive migration of people to California at this time from the whole world that, you know, it really changed certainly the United States, and it gave us some hints about other things like that happen. If you're in a 9-to-5 job, well, you know, your risk of loss is probably low, or used to be, at least until this last pandemic, and potential reward, not so much. If you're a startup, and you have a successful exit, well, you know, you might have risked a lot of things along the way, but the reward could be very, very great. And then we have other things in here like market speculation and gambling and small business, and you can each decide where they might go in this very, very general sort of two-dimensional graph. But anyway, that's going to bring us to what I think is a good definition of risk to start with for everyone. And Sierra, you've got really close here. The way I talk about it is that a risk is a story about uncertainty that begins with the word if, and it describes potential consequences. They could be good and they could be bad. And here are some examples. Well, if you drive above the speed limit, you might get a ticket. If our company isn't funded by a certain date, we might have to close down. If we misunderstand the customer and user problems and ideas, we might waste valuable time and resources. It's as simple as that, really. And then we move into what is called risk management. And the way I'd like to describe this is that it's the process of connecting risks and all their associated stories in an arc of a story. So all these things get connected. So where did the risk come from? For instance, is this something that humans caused? Is it, you know, something that technology caused? Is it something that is the result of a new regulation that's coming into effect? The way I think in lean startup, the way it's looked at is you have market, team, customers. So you can use any categories you want, but it's a good idea to think about, like, you know, where it emanated. Then you have what else could happen, bad or good. And then there's the nature of our relationship to a specific risk. And here what I mean is, if we go back to that previous slide, so if you drive above the speed limit, you might get a ticket. Well, you could just take that chance. You know, you could just ignore it and take the chance that because you think that the probability is low that it's going to happen. You could transfer certain risks to someone else. And that's essentially what insurance is, right? You're transferring the risk that your home or car could be involved in an accident, or you'd have a home fire or something like that, that you transfer that by paying the insurance company so that you will minimize your losses. Then you've got things like how likely is it for the risk to become real, and how serious will it be if that condition becomes an issue? And this is a point where we'll talk about issues versus risks. So risk.
Quick butt in here. Sorry to interrupt, Rick.
Yeah.
Are you cool with sharing these slides afterwards, or should people take furious notes?
Oh, no, I'll share them.
Great, thanks.
So issues and risks are totally different. Risks are uncertain. Issues are things that are already affecting your business or your life at home or whatever. And we talk about two things when we're talking about how we can compare the relative seriousness or severity of a risk. And that's the probability that something will happen and the impact that it will have if it does become an issue. Those two things, you can give them numerical scores, probability from 0% to 100%. Although if it's 0% probability, then you shouldn't be dealing with it at all. If it's 100% probability, then it's an issue and you have to deal with it in a different way. Then using those values, whether we take probability from 0 to 100%, and then the impact or how serious it will be, it could be high, medium, low. It could be a numerical scale. Also, multiply those two one by the other, and you get something that will allow you to look at the relative severity of risks one over another. And then there are ways that we can minimize the potential severity of the risk. Again, insurance is an example of how we approach it, but let's say we can lower the probability that something will happen. Or if it does happen, we can lower the impact. And an example here would be if your risk is that you don't have enough developmental resources to meet your deadline, you can add a resource, and that would reduce the probability that you're going to have a problem. And also, in that case, probably reduce the impact. Sometimes it's one or the other. Sometimes it's both things together. So let's take a look at what are the sort of classic terms in the vocabulary of risk management. And so I talked about where did the risk come from. That's either the category, and sometimes it's called the root cause, although root cause analysis is a very complicated thing. The approach, whether we're going to transfer it to somebody else, ignore it, confront it, other ways of doing it, that's just, what's the nature of a relationship. Then there are downstream consequences. What else could happen? The impact, which we discussed here, I, probability P, and it's the exposure, E equals I times P, that gives us how we can compare the vulnerability for different risks and how we can prioritize them. Then we have mitigation planning. So mitigation planning would be what things do we put into place in order to lower the probability or lower the impact or both, which minimizes our vulnerability. And then there's contingency planning. And the difference between contingency planning and mitigation planning is that mitigation planning, you are in risk management. Contingency planning is for the situation where that risk becomes an issue and you have to do something about it immediately. And I haven't been talking about the coronavirus here, but you can use this and find hundreds of examples of where people weren't paying attention and weren't doing mitigation planning, weren't doing contingency planning. And, we could talk about the probability of this coronavirus pandemic. The probability is not as low as you would think. Historically, if you look over the last 150 years, there's been a serious epidemic of a really bad disease or a pandemic, every 5 to 20 years. So it shouldn't have been a surprise to us that this is happening now, and we should have had these things in place. Any questions at this point?
I've kind of this meta question, and I'm hanging up on your original comment and observation that the lean canvas that so many of our Activate companies have been exposed to doesn't have like a risk zone.
Mm-hmm.
What is your guidance in terms of, and I know you have kind of a framework to point people to hereafter, but for that startup founder, that 100% of the weight of the entire thing is on their shoulders, what's the appropriate mind space spend on risk management, if you will, in these early phases of the business? How would you approach that, kind of thinking back at some of your previous businesses and successes and failures and stuff?
Yeah, well, the most important thing is you don't want to get bogged down doing this all the time. And that's why if you use a framework and you use a spreadsheet, which is normally called a risk register, where you register all the things that could happen or are happening already to a certain extent. But you never want to look at more than 10 risks at a time, your top 10 risks. And for a startup, it's probably closer to 3 to 5. The things that are really time sensitive and, that could hit you earlier rather than later. I think that would be the place to focus. Does that answer your question?
That's great. That's
Yeah.
great. Anybody have follow-up questions?
Okay. So this is how you can look at it. You will see diagrams like this that describe risk management that are a little bit different. I've changed things here somewhat so that we can map them to the stories that I described. And so, number one, identify, where did it come from? What's our relationship? Number two, what else is going on? How serious is it going to be? The prioritization, that's when we start to use the exposure value, P times I, have things, reprioritized as often as you do this. It probably should be something that the team looks at weekly, if not weekly, at least monthly, or you're going to get behind. And then we need the planning, which is either contingency planning or mitigation planning, and control, which needs to happen because over time, one risk is going to be less severe and one is going to be more. And you need to be in a position where you can address the top ones, the ones that are going to which you're most vulnerable. Then in the middle, I've just said that this needs to be a collaboration and learning experience for your entire team. In other words, it's not that this is, even though this is thought of as a classic section of project management, it's not just for the project manager to do. This is something that the team needs to get involved in, do some brainstorming. The project manager, wherever is managing the actual risk register, can deal with that and can tweak that and present it back to the group. But everybody needs to be involved. And in most cases, any individual risk needs to be assigned an owner who's going to be on point to take care of it. And if you look at the identify, where did it come from? Well, you're going to have technology people who are experts at what they do, and you're going to have business people who are experts at what they do, and maybe finance people. And depending on where the risk emanated from, you'd probably assign it to a specific owner if you have people with specializations. Okay, how are we doing? Are you ready to get your hands dirty again a little bit? Okay. So we're going to do breakout.
One question, a couple of questions here. One from Sammy. The combination of your quote risk register and TJ's, well, it's not mine, but the lean canvas sounds like you recommend looking at each section and ask what could go wrong. So you're looking at the lean canvas, customer segments, whatever. Applying a risk lens.
That is one way you could categorize it, but there are other ways. And that's
Okay.
that's not as important as sort of being, just knowing where it came from is useful for knowing who it should be assigned to in most cases.
Becky asked a good question too, kind of derivative or kind of getting to relate this whole session to that very, very early stage startup. So businesses at different stages often have different kinds of risks. What do you think are the biggest risks for startups? Or do you think that is more dependent on the business?
I think one of the biggest risks for startup is team, and whether the team is really functional and they understand, each person understands their roles and responsibilities. And there's delineation, but also backup. So I think that would be one of the top ones. Of course, we all know, especially in this time, that the financial issue is a big one. And then, you know, some of you are in a place where it's very, very hard to continue without getting that funding. So that's probably always going to be a risk for you. And then there are other things like schedules, and you know, I think are going to be equally important. How quickly you get that stuff out. And
it's a great question and a good one to ask ourselves as startups. For the sake of time, with our 18 minutes we have remaining, let's go ahead and move on to the exercise here, Rick.
okay.
And then we can do maybe Q&A after this breakout, because I want to get to that.
Okay. So we're going to break out. I want you to develop a single risk description, something that's relevant to one of your businesses, and then all the stories that go around it. So, oops. All these things that are on the exterior of this circle. And if you need to, I will actually share this, or I'll leave this up now so you can see it.
My recommendation is take a screen print or a snapshot so that you have that in your Snippy tool or your Paint or whatever amazing technology you use for snapshots. And then we're opening rooms now, so go ahead and join.
Any comments?
Yeah, no, it's going good. I think yeah, it's just a matter of time. You know, it goes by fast, the hour. So what's the plan for this breakout room?
So we've got let's.
And we're back, Rick.
Okay, let me share the screen again.
That was totally enough time to solve all of our problems, right, everybody?
One more second here. I had to close the PowerPoint for a minute, and are you seeing?
Not yet.
You know, I feel like we should all be doing the Brady Bunch thing, you know?
Screen, where are we here?
I can see.
Can you see the main screen?
I'm not seeing it.
I don't see it.
For some reason, it's not showing me the main one. Let's try here.
There we go.
Good.
So how did that go? Does this idea of the stories help, or does it make it more difficult?
We didn't get to the risk exposure calculation whatsoever. We got to 1 and 2 in the 5-step process ourselves.
Okay. Chop, do you want to?
Yeah, I was going to just second what TJ was saying. It did not feel like we had enough time, especially with 3 of us in our group. But the idea of story, it makes it so you're less stubborn about it and you're more willing to listen to other ideas, and you're less convinced. You've convinced yourself less of the pain points.
Mm-hmm. Anyone think differently? No? So maybe from another group, could someone share the risk that you discussed?
Yeah, I can go if you want me to.
Okay.
Yeah. So, I mean, we just didn't have too much time, so we went with the obvious one, the risk of running out of money. Yeah. So we tried to go around the 5 steps really fast. We didn't really get to the P and I and E parts, but that's an inherent risk that we've been dealing with the entire time. Obviously, the risk comes from starting a business, and we kind of talked about the relationship of that risk to how I work every day, right? So, it's a serious risk. It's a real risk. It's kind of mitigating that risk, since we started with a small team, that's part of mitigating that risk. I've been doing a lot of work to mitigate it because, there are so many different options when building an online-based startup that you have, and all of those options have different financial risks associated with them. So just trying to figure out how to balance all those things together to kind of, if extend our time, I feel like that mitigates the risk, right? If we can last longer, then that's.
Yeah, as I said, some of those are time sensitive, right?
Yeah.
So how would you go about calculating the probability and the impact for a risk like that? Because this is sort of the black art. But what I can say to you is just start somewhere, put a number in, see how it looks the next time around when you have the meeting and you're reviewing these. Is that correct? So you could say that the impact of not getting any funding by a certain date will be catastrophic, right? You would say it's 90% or something like that. Maybe there would be some people who continued on. The probability would depend on, well, what have you got in the pipeline in terms of financing options, right? Do you, just the way a sales pipeline is viewed, you can think of that finance pipeline as how far along it is and how likely is it that we're actually going to get that financing. Or you're using the inverse here about what happens when you don't get the financing. So if you're 45%, you think you're going to get the financing, you're 55%, you're not. And so just start somewhere, go somewhere, look at things. If you have, look at historical data that you might have, look at what you've experienced in previous companies or previous jobs, and take that experience to put a first number on those things so that you can prioritize them. Now, any other comments about this exercise? So I apologize. I was hoping to have a risk register template ready for you today that you could actually use. I will try to get that out within the next couple of days. And what I'd like to see you guys do is take it back to your companies. When you have a team meeting, spend some time on this. Maybe it's 15 minutes, a half an hour, brainstorming the risks and their downstream consequences, what's going to happen later. And then you can think about the probabilities and the impact later. It doesn't have to be at that time. But it, you know, first of all, get them identified, do what you can to analyze it, start thinking about mitigation and contingency plans. So if you did not get that funding, the contingency plan would be maybe a checklist about what you're going to do. What are you going to do with your space? What are you going to do with your employees? What are you going to do with the money that you have left over? What are you going to do with your IP? All those things.
It's really good. A couple of comments here, Rick, at the from Dan. If you want to share this session with a team member, fellow entrepreneur, it is up at activatenm.com/WordPress built-in URL descriptors. And we really, really would love you all just to take a couple minutes when the call ends to go to this SurveyMonkey link. So just, I don't know about your Zooms, but I have to laboriously copy and then go to my Chrome or my browser and paste it. Would you all please copy that link and then go to your browsers and paste it? We want to make this series good, and Rick has given of his time, and I think the least that we can do is give him feedback so that we exchange value here as entrepreneurs. Again, thank you, Rick. I think I was taking notes, felt like I was back at school with a great teacher. And I know you're going to send the materials on through Dan, but I found this very heartening in the sense that it's empowering rather than getting inundated with the sense of risk and not being able to really kind of capture it and put it somewhere. This is a really great tool, and look forward to seeing the register as well. Just having a tool set to use rather than, oh crap, oh crap, oh crap, and that kind of pervasive sense that we all have in our entrepreneurial journeys. Instills peace, and it's not actually boring, it's empowering. So really appreciated this session. Give them go to your reactions and give Rick a round of applause. All right. And thanks so much for coming, everybody. Good job staying engaged. Thanks, Dan, for disc jockeying the Zoom for us. And yeah, we're around.
So we'll just leave you with this quote. This is from Walter Wriston, he was the CEO of Citibank for many, many, many years. And all of life is the management of risk, not its elimination. So you don't need a crystal ball. Just imagine the risk, imagine all the connected stories, and you'll be good.
Thanks so much, Rick. Let's all take that survey, and happy Friday. Stay safe, stay healthy, stay engaged. Thanks, everybody.
All right. Thank you. Take care.